Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are here, as always, on the bonus feed, here between Season 4 and Season 5, where there is no break. Each and every week, we continue to do new shows. They're intentionalized episodes for, the last 4 or 5 months now?
Months. It's crazy.
The randomizer is getting a break. The randomizer might as well be a school teacher at this point. It's been off for so long. Like teachers, though, we love the randomizer. It's getting a break. This is an intentionalized episode. And with that, not only is it a listener-chosen episode, we have a guest here at Wrestling at Random. It is my longtime co-host, our longtime close personal friend, Mike Sempervive here. And you might be able to guess what territory this show is going to be about if we brought in Mike.
Obviously, it's Southwest Championship Wrestling.
We love ourselves some Southwest Championship Wrestling, but no, definitely you know him from the Mid-Atlantic Championship Podcast, Wrestling Observer Live, and how I start my morning. It's the wrestling news, of course. Mike Sempervive has to come on to help us talk Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
Wait, Jeremy, you don't know him from the Big Audio Nightmare, the podcast that brought us together as friends?
You already just did a Big Audio Nightmare plug. That was
Yeah, but there hadn't been one in like 37 seconds.
Okay.
Pay the toll.
Exactly. The longest running Japanese-based wrestling radio show anywhere in the world. You got to shove that in there.
And I love you say radio show because it was a podcast literally before the word podcast was a thing.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes. In fact, we get yelled at about that. How could you call yourself a radio show if you're not on the radio? I don't know, or audio file or real media file. What do you want us to call it? Okay. But
yeah, Al Gore built the tubes. And we created podcasts. It's exactly. Real history, indisputable.
Yes. Remind our listeners how many years now the Big Audio Nightmare.
We are beyond 17 years. Early March 2016 is when we started doing that show, and I believe our first podcast together was November of the year prior, when I had replaced, as if that's possible, Mike on the PPH. Dr. Keith Lipinski went on paternity leave, and Mike came in to do, I think, 3 or 4 shows to fill in for Keith, and that's when the dream was born.
And it hasn't stopped since.
No, and it's incredible. A lot of our listeners are definitely crossover listeners to the Big Audio Nightmare, so I'm sure they're very excited to have you two combined again on our feed here. This is always fun.
Look, hopefully I can dazzle some of these folks who are supporters of your Patreon to come out of their pockets for $5 and join the Mid-Atlantic Championship Patreon as well too. We're run down a lot of old shows, and I'm trying to add some different stuff to that. So I really appreciate you having me on here to talk about old Mid-Atlantic. And in fact, it's not just some old craptastic Mid-Atlantic show. It's a pretty darn good one.
It is, and we have Patron Kendall to thank for that. He is bringing you this week's content. He's the intentionalizer for the week. He is the randomizer. He bumped himself up to that second tier that you can do on our Patreon that you're subscribed to right now. You bump yourself up to that tier. You send us a request, say, can you watch this show? As long as it's over 10 years old, the answer is yes, we will watch that show. And then you can bump yourself back down. Continue to enjoy all the bonus content every single week. So thank you, Patron Kendall, for picking a great one, like Mike said. This is Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, September 4th, 1982, Season 10, Episode 36, if you're watching on the cock. And it is, it's a good one. We'll deep dive into it. But let's start with the very beginning. And Mike, I love me some Mid-Atlantic theme song, and we get the classic funky theme song to open up the show. You're hearing it in the background right now as you're listening to this podcast.
You know, I can never stop hearing it. I can never stop hearing the original. Got to Have Lovin'. That's the original. And then they throw, I believe it's called Manila Skies. If you were to search on YouTube for it, I believe that's what it's called. The overwhelming overdub that they have to put on there because, well, we're not going to kick out that money to Don Ray, even though I don't think the man is even alive anymore. But we're not going to give any money to his estate and license Got to Have Lovin'. So we've got to go with the overdub.
I'm too distracted by Manila Skies, which sounds like the name of an NXT women's champion.
Give it time. Give it time.
Bob Caudle welcomes us to the show.
Yes,
and
Just
he
had
runs.
a birthday.
Really?
Yes, now that I make this a non-evergreen show, but as we break kayfabe here on August 3rd, I believe his birthday was either yesterday or the day before, but I believe Bob, God bless him, is about 9,000 years old. He and his wife still alive, still together after all of these years.
Wow. And Bob Caudle's one of those guys I didn't have an appreciation for until we started going back and watching some of these older shows, because I remember, I had Bob Caudle just as the other guy with Jim Ross in the WCW years, but now watching him carry a lot of these shows, he was a ton of fun with David Crockett.
He's very underrated. You think about Lance Russell, who gets a lot of the credit holding that microphone solo or with Dave Brown, or you have Gordon Soley, who essentially held it solo unless you had a Piper or a Tom Pritchard or Steve-O or somebody like that jumping in there. I don't know if people really understand how solid Bob Caudle was and how good he was at keeping that show moving. A lot of people look at Bob and they put him in with their own promotion's eyes. Like if you watched Mean Gene or whatever, Bob Caudle is boring if you saw Lance or whatever, but when you really kind of just take him for what he did there in the Carolinas and how he was able to carry that show, especially in comparison to what Rich Landrum or David Crockett would do on Worldwide, he is extremely underrated. And I think having these shows on Peacock for the people that did start, because they started in late 81, when you have a chance to really see him a lot, you do realize how good he was. And you realize that, towards the end, Jim Ross was a lot better, and they did focus on Tony Schiavone and all that. But Bob Caudle on his own was a very important piece to keep that show moving. And you also see that, as I'm sure we're going to get to, in some of the interviews with younger guys that did not go out, or, when the local ads were running, a lot of the stuff that took place in the studio, you see how he leads some of those folks along, and he does a really good job of it.
Tell me you're talking about Kelly Kiniski without telling me you're talking about Kelly Kiniski. But no, I agree on Bob Caudle. He's one of those guys that there's a warmth. There's again, like you mentioned some of the other guys that I think it's completely fair to, in a positive way, put him in the same bin with. He's the adult in the room with all these other crazy people, and he grounds you. While also the thing I enjoy about him, maybe in some ways even more than some of the other guys that you compared him to, is that there's this constant believable level of like wonderment from Bob Caudle about what he's experiencing here on the show, which is not easy to do week in and week out in a believable way, but he pulls it off.
And he never cracks. That's one of the amazing parts of him too, is, Jim Ross said it. There's that shot of Bob Caudle interviewing Doom where they made the crack that is a white man in brown shoes, as this older guy. And he says, and you see it in Smoky Mountain when he's interviewing New Jack and all that. But no matter what was ever said by anybody, even though you get some bemusement out of him, even though he would go along with what he would need to go along with, he was almost impossible to crack. And you had some folks there, whether it be, the Abdullahs of the world, over the Pipers or the Valiants or whoever it is, that were so out of control. And here's this incredible moment of calm, just sitting there, taking this all in and giving it out to you.
And he was great even in Smoky Mountain. I mean, obviously, older and didn't quite have the fastball that he had, in 1982, but he was still very good at shepherding that show along in Smoky Mountain.
Big time.
We go to the ring. Our opening match is for the Mid-Atlantic Championship. We're told there are standby matches scheduled in the event this does not go the entire hour, which we love every time we do that.
Still my heart. There's nothing I love more in a wrestling show with a title match than with it starting with the match that has a 60-minute time limit, and them telling us that there are standby matches. If this match that we have to give this time to because it's so important, if that match ends, then we'll have this.
The Mid-Atlantic Championship on the line. This combination I'm looking at in the ring. Patron Kendall is obviously trolling Adam Summers directly.
Oh,
as
my God.
We see the challenger, Paul Jones, with his manager, Sir Oliver Humperdinck. It's Big Daddy Dink, Adam.
the wrestler Paul Jones, not the manager Paul Jones, who I've been pretty merciless about here on this podcast, and maybe it's just been a bad selection of times with Paul Jones as the manager of various geeks. But yes, wrestler Paul Jones, managed by the future Big Daddy Dink, Oliver Humperdinck. What's most noteworthy here is Oliver Humperdinck dressed to the nines. I have no idea what to do with this. Yes, he's got the crazy outlandish red hair. He's not quite as heavy as he would be later, and he's dressed like a businessman.
This has got to be the most business-like and professional looking, at least as far as general terms go, Sir Oliver Humperdinck ever. You think it with Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts as members of the of the Hollywood Blondes team, and you see those outfits, and they look completely ridiculous, all three of them. What he did in Florida with the Sullivan's Army, and then we saw him with the shirt just hanging wide open there with the SST being the big kahuna in WCW and all that. Just all these garish outfits to go with those bug eyes and that bright red hair. But here's one time where he actually looks like a manager, a real legitimate manager of men.
And not only a manager of men, a manager of men with a stable name, the House of Humperdinck, which
name.
To me, the one thing I thought immediately, so much better than the House of Truth.
Yes.
I've discovered that I like Oliver Humperdinck better than one manager in the history of pro wrestling, Truth Martini.
Yeah, former listener, Truth Martini. We lost him years ago. Jones's opponent is the Mid-Atlantic champion and a favorite of this podcast in the limited exposure we've had of him on the podcast so far. It's Jack Brisco. Mike, how did we get here with Jack Brisco as the Mid-Atlantic champion?
Boy, I'd have to really kind of to go back, but we should go back a little bit, because if you guys like this show, somebody needs to suggest the show where Roddy Piper faced Jack Brisco for the Mid-Atlantic Championship.
Yes, please.
That one, because if not, I might have to do it myself, because that is one of the best single one-off pro wrestling shows that you're going to find.
Wow.
There's a lot of you think about the Rock and Roll coming in and being the Koloffs that went the entire show, and you think about some of those.
Blair DiBiase Mid-South, which we had someone pick a few months back.
Absolutely. That fits perfectly along those lines, with Roddy Piper breaking out the coins and knocking Jack Brisco out, and then the promos that were cut afterwards. And what about the coins? Well, the fans, they were throwing money into the ring. They were so happy, but Jack Brisco ended up getting the championship back from Roddy Piper, and this is going to be Jack Brisco's last real singles run, I believe, of his entire career. In fact, it was his last singles run, because he would end up turning heel the next year. He would end up becoming a heel alongside his brother, going after Steamboat and Youngblood. So these were the last runs with singles championships that he had, and obviously at this point in the game, he worked with people that he had been working with for years, including number one Paul Jones, who is a legend in Florida. Hard to believe when you watch him in mid-'80s Jim Crockett Promotions how this guy ever got popular at all, but there's a reason that he was able to last 30 years in the Mid-Atlantic and in Florida, because he had such a reputation built up. Women would love him. He was a great heel when he turned on Steamboat, when he would turn on this person or that person. He knew how to be slimy, plus he was a really great worker. When you watch him in the ring, he is a very good worker. You may not love his personality, but that's who Dory Funk was working with, or Dory Funk Jr., who was doing the booking. That's who, he put those two together, and it really ended up being pretty perfect, because we were going into a time, or coming out of a time, where Paul Jones, again, just gave up being a babyface. He would go through these turns, but he had turned on Brisco, he had turned on Wahoo McDaniel, and turned on his friends, and joined up with Sir Oliver Humperdinck in the House of Humperdinck that had Joe LeDuc, it had Leroy Brown, it had a collection of people, and Paul Jones was kind of, at that point, really the crown jewel in that setup.
Brisco is 41 years old here, and Paul Jones is 40 years old.
False. That is impossible. Brisco is at least 58 and Paul Jones is 61.
Isn't it crazy? You watch all this old wrestling. I was such a big fan of Eddie Gilbert growing up. He died at 34. You look at all these guys, and you look at just even if they didn't pass away, like Harley Race, who at 35 years old looks 65 years old. It is amazing.
It's one of our favorite topics on this podcast.
Yes,
the Cheers meme. Where it's everyone looks 60 and they're all between 28 and 34.
Yeah.
The road will own you. It's true. It's true.
It's amazing how much older people looked in the 70s and 80s compared to today. It's absolutely incredible.
I believe the phrase is cocaine is a hell of a drug.
And just cigarette smoke everywhere.
Yes,
everywhere. I think that's a big part of it too. And asbestos is probably involved somehow too.
Yes. I mean, all that stuff. I remember being, like my brother's 4 years younger than me, and I remember my brother being in 5th grade science class, and I'm 42, he's 46. I remember him telling us, coming up from school and telling us that the teacher had everyone dip their fingers in vats of mercury to see the properties of mercury and how it would move around. We've come a long way.
Before the match starts.
How are we all still here or even got here? It is amazing.
It's amazing. Before the match starts, we come back from commercial, and Bob is joined by the U.S. champion Wahoo McDaniel, Jerry Brisco, and Jack Brisco. Jack says he wants Paul Jones because this is the match that he wants. And Jerry lets us all know that the doctor told Jack that he needs 4 weeks off still. He's begging, don't do it. Don't risk another injury to the leg. Jack says it'll be fine as he heads to the ring.
You did this, by the way, in so much more of a compelling way than these two men did. I love Jack Brisco. Jerry Brisco is like delightfully pathetic in his delivery at all times. But man, like, it's just how they talk. But you don't take away any sort of conviction in this from either guy at this point. But they're just understated. It's how they are.
That's how they are.
From Oklahoma, right there, boy.
Yeah.
Wahoo says that Jack might just beat Paul Jones with one leg. His money is on Jack Brisco, and we're told that this injury is a result of a parking lot attack at the hands of Paul Jones. So we always like to check in when we parachute into a show, and we just drop in without watching any previous context. How fast does a show catch you up? Mid-Atlantic just caught me up in minutes before a very important championship match.
And then during the match, I believe it's during this match, or maybe it was later in the show, Bob Caudle again does this, and he specifically says, for all of you who are joining us for the first time, and then he lays out again what happened. Great stuff. It's always
tremendous.
Very welcome when we have this on a show.
The little things. It's the little things. You know, you don't have to beat people over the head with it. You don't have to give them the full Young and the Restless recap at the beginning of the show on what you missed yesterday, but you slide those things in there, and you slide them in as the match goes on as well, too. It's where, as you go along with these shows, Gary Hart, and you don't even have to go along with this show. Anytime you hear Gary Hart in Georgia or Dallas or Florida, yes, he had part of the book. He knew what was going on. But those things that he would add during the show are so important. They're so very important that announcers, again, it's a lost art nowadays. I could go off on Excalibur last night. I won't. I'm going to wait till Adam Summers to do that at some point as I continue
go on my Twitter and you'll see my thoughts on the comparison between modern wrestling announcers and how they handle emotional, violent segments with wrestlers in peril compared to things we've seen previously on this podcast. It's a lost art.
Let's dig into the art of this match, where it's a quick start for Jack Brisco, takes him down. He's working over the leg of Jones. After a rope break, we get another takedown, back to work on the legs of Jones. We get a "Go Jack Go" chant from the studio crowd. Jones breaks the hold by kicking his way free. Brisco then he does the knee breaker over the knee like you're used to seeing Ric Flair do before a figure four.
This is the gif of the show, by the way. If you follow us on social media, you will see the knee breaker by Jack Brisco and the incredible, ridiculous, campy sell from Paul Jones. It is the first thing I've ever enjoyed Paul Jones doing in my life, and thus I had to immortalize it as the gift for this show, playing endlessly till I leave this earth.
Brisco takes Jones' leg, wraps it around the ring post, another takedown, and Brisco ties him up on the mat. Jones is able to get some shots in. He attacks the leg of Brisco for the first time. Brisco fights free from the bottom. Jones tries to slam him, but his leg gives out. Brisco right back on the leg again, and oh no, Greg the Hammer Valentine has made his way out to ringside.
He is apparently part of the House of Humperdinck, a new member. You did leave out maybe one of the best counters I've ever seen in professional wrestling. Jones is trying to fight back while his leg is being beaten on. Jack Brisco counters with a go behind and then bites the leg of Paul Jones to break him down to then put the leg lock on. That was beautiful. What was also beautiful is having David Crockett here joining Bob Caudle on commentary. And David Crockett, he always just says ridiculous things that no other human being would say. In the middle of this, while Bob Caudle is telling us that tape machines will be rolling in case we have to go to commercial and miss any of the action, David Crockett just blurts out, "It is a special match for our special friends." What? What does any of this mean? I don't know. I don't care. I love David Crockett.
But we love it. Yeah, we love David Crockett.
I hated him as a kid. Yeah. I hated him as a young adult when I acquired a 49-disc Best of the Four Horsemen set. And as we've started doing this podcast, I've learned to just let go and love David Crockett for who he is.
I used to not be able to stand Vince McMahon and David Crockett. Vince McMahon, because it was always the put on and screaming at you and all that stuff. But in hindsight, with what he was trying to do, and obviously it worked perfectly. David Crockett the same way. I didn't like it because I liked Tony Schiavone, and David would get too excited. But now in hindsight, looking back, especially taking in his position and what the wrestling business is, I get it. He was still sloppy and all over the place at times.
Well, he had no idea.
That was his charm.
He had the charm. And part of the charm was he had no idea how to read when to jump in, when to jump out. He would say something and then randomly pause for like 15 seconds. And you could feel Tony Schiavone not knowing if he should start talking again or not. And then David Crockett would just start talking again and finish his point. It's like
Tony, look at him, and Tony would be like, "Yeah." I mean, it was.
No announcer has ever used the non-word "look it" as effectively. No matter how much Michael Cole may have tried, he's not able to pull that off.
After they're trading some shots, Brisco gets him down and goes for the figure four. Hump is on the apron, and Brisco chases Humperdinck, and when he chases him, he jumps out of the ring to the floor, and he's hurt. He's re-aggravated the injury.
This is great. Mike, you talk about the little things. I loved this, how Humperdinck knows that Jack is hurt. He knows that if he gets him to chase, something bad could happen, and that's exactly what occurs.
And not only did he just jump down and blow his leg out, they did have a wire there. Yes, it was the camera wire or the mic. One of the wires was there, and they don't beat it to death. But when he jumps out, that wire is right there when he goes down. And then he's got to, work his way back into the ring. And one thing that Humperdinck has, hanging over the baby face is, you came after me. I never touched you. You came out and injured yourself before you went back into the ring. That's on you. So it was very well done that way.
I love, by the way, David pointing out the wire. It was so 2023 Tony Schiavone on AEW, like looking for the smallest possible thing to point out that you could say is having an impact on a match. It was very good.
Jones is on the attack now. Brisco fights back with punches to the gut, which I appreciated. And then Jones is in the corner. Brisco charges at him, charges into the corner, but Jones gets a strike to the throat. Brisco collapses.
They had mentioned earlier on in the match, Caudle had mentioned in passing that the karate stylings of Paul Jones, which is a lovely sentence to be able to say, were illegal, and we have not seen him do anything like that yet this match.
The great part is before this match and then in the shows that come after this match, there's not much with Paul Jones working his karate thing. He's not exactly superstar Billy Graham out there, chopping away or anything. It was basically something that they could use in this match that would allow something nefarious to happen to Jack Brisco and hopefully allow Paul Jones, for his sake, to get the victory.
Yeah, Brisco collapses to the mat. He's holding his neck as Jones jumps on top, grabs the trunks, gets the pin. We have a new Mid-Atlantic champion. It's number 1, Paul Jones.
I love the double cheat here. The illegal throat thrust and then the pull of the tights. That's what it's all about as a heel.
Just to make sure, if that didn't seal the deal with the throat, I'm cheating here, brother, and I'm going to just pull these pants up all the way here as Jack Brisco tries to escape.
I would have loved if somehow he had managed with the other hand to poke him in the eyes while this was happening.
After commercial, the aforementioned Kelly Kiniski is here with Bob Caudle.
Oh, my God.
Kiniski should not be cutting a promo.
He should not be talking.
Oh, my gosh. This was awful stuff. This man is 22, by the way.
Being
22.
the operative word. We always talk about how these guys who can't cut promos will get nervous and then fall back on a crutch phrase. Kelly Kiniski says, and stuff at the end of almost every sentence here.
Which is still better than, as you continue to watch along, when they bring out Don Kernoodle's brother, Rocky Kernoodle, and which at the time he was still Keith Larson, and I don't know, Adam, you would know this. Jeremy, I don't know if you do or if any listeners out there know, but there were 2 NASCAR brothers named Jeff and Ward Burton. Oh
my God, yes.
And Don, I guess, would be kind of like Ward Burton in that he had a very pronounced Southern accent, and he would go up, but you could understand him clearly. Then there was the other brother, or I guess that would be Ward.
Yeah, you're getting them transposed. Yeah. Jeff had a little higher pitched, like Southern accent, but you could understand it. Ward Burton was like if the Appalachian Mountains were a voice.
Yes, he must have lived in a tent his entire life in the backyard as Jeff was going to school. Cause it was big, it was kind of like this, and that's basically Rocky Kernoodle, who's out there, and Bob is trying to get him through 2 minutes, and it's like, well, what do you think about Roddy Piper? Yeah, he's good, and he's gonna be, you got to watch him. He's all sorts of maneuvers, right? Yeah, I mean, you got to watch out the eye poke and everything. I don't know. He wears a skirt and yeah, it was. Some of these are rough. And look, for those people who don't know, at this point in the show, when you see these mostly on the network, this is when the drop-ins were airing for the local towns. So for the most part, you never saw any of this. This was practice for a lot of those guys, or just something to pop the crowd. For the most part, there would be some things that would get sent because the show was on in Florida, in Texas, and other places where if they had something specific to say about Florida or wherever, something like that, then they would leave that in. But for the most part, these were just some guys trying to get experience on the microphone like Kelly Kiniski.
Yeah, 22 years old.
Big
Kelly
blunder.
Kiniski.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also, in this promo, how both Kelly Kiniski and Bob Caudle called Greg Valentine Greg Valiant, which is not as bad as, was it later on in the show, someone called, it may have actually been Humperdinck, when he joined the booth, said Greg Valentine. And I feel like Jeremy has spent way too much Greg Valentine watching Hammer matches and promos across the last 3 years of this podcast.
No, I know that Patron Kendall here is laughing uproariously that this show has Paul Jones and Humperdinck and Greg Valentine all on the same show. He's
the Venn diagram of how to troll Adam Summers and Jeremy Deemer.
He's successfully trolled us.
Money well spent, while also giving us a very entertaining show. So
no, absolutely.
It really is like the smallest needle in the largest haystack.
That's exactly what this is. Kelly Kiniski is taking on Joe LeDuc. And the best part of this match was them trading hard shots back and forth, chops and forearms.
This ring is mic'd very well because not only are, these chops are devastating, but when guys hit the ropes, I'm ducking and covering under my desk like it's the 60s.
And they hated, in comparison to taping at WRAL when they moved the show to WPCQ, because there was an Entertainment Tonight or a PM Magazine show that was starting up, so they had to move the show, and they went into a much, much smaller studio setup there. But one of the advantages...
smaller than this studio?
Oh, this was the small one. No,
this is like a shoebox if your shoes are like size 3. It's fascinating to see where they put the cameras and where they put the grandstand.
And look where they put the ring and how the ring is actually, kind of catty corner. There is no real flat shot of that ring like you're used to just seeing it like that. No, the ring is tilted, and they had a camera in the corner, and they had to be careful on how they did everything. But because of that size and because of the crowd, too, where they were was so invested into what they were doing. It just, the environment that was whipped up inside that place, it was actually a great, great benefit. Again, must have been terrible to kind of work in and to deal with and all that other stuff. But as a fan watching at home and a fan watching in hindsight, it's great.
From a visual standpoint, obviously there's fans here. There weren't fans in what I'm about to mention. But the only thing I could think of as a parallel was in the early stages of the pandemic, Noah did a few shows in that tiny, tiny, tiny little studio. Not like Noah's office building, though, but this tiny little studio where you couldn't even go out of the ring on a couple sides. That's what this looked like. I always like when you have buildings that are so small or oddly shaped that it forces strange camera shots.
Yes, and that's one of the things, and I'm not going to speak about today's modern NWA other than to say I've watched the show from Studio One in Highland Park, and they just do not take advantage of the small space that they're in the way that Mid-Atlantic does, and they have a little bit more room to play with and everything, but production-wise and quality-wise, compared to this show, damn near 40 years ago, it's not even close.
It's amazing to me. This is a controversial statement you're making, Mike, that Jim Crockett Promotions or that Mid-Atlantic in 1982 understands how to produce wrestling better than Billy Corgan in 2023. The aggregators are going to be losing their minds over this one.
I'm not throwing shade. I'm just pointing out something in my mind.
Just holding the umbrella over the studio over Billy Corgan's bald head so he doesn't get sunburned.
You say you love old wrestling so much and you're so inspired by it. You do something better.
We're learning every week on this podcast as we go back and watch these old shows. Here in this match, the finish comes when Kiniski jumps to do something, but LeDuc kicks him in the chest, and LeDuc picks him up in like a bear hug position, falls back, drops Kiniski on his face. Hump declares that that's enough, and LeDuc picks him up. That's not enough, and LeDuc picks him up at 2, hits a huge backbreaker, and gets the pin.
This is my favorite finish in the history of professional wrestling. Everything about this is incredible. Kelly goes for a drop kick. Joe LeDuc just kicks him directly in the scrotum. We then go from that to the most terrifying belly-to-belly suplex ever as Joe LeDuc is going for a belly-to-belly. Kelly Kiniski at 22 years old not only does not know how to do a promo, but does not know what a belly-to-belly suplex is.
Face first.
Takes it directly on his forehead like it's a flatliner. And then Joe LeDuc hits the best one-arm backbreaker you've ever seen.
That was tremendous.
Amazing.
Kelly Kiniski is not a small man. And that just shows you how strong Joe LeDuc was. Just incredibly strong. You see those, so at this point, I don't know how many people have seen the deal with him in the van that Ken Patera and that other people have done, where he puts his back up against the wall outside, and they have the van spinning its wheels, and he's holding it back with his legs. I mean, this dude was just one of those freakishly strong human beings, and unbelievable. He just scoops Kiniski up, and again, the landing too on the knee, it's so perfect, but it's like, if I did that, I'm just trying to think, would my leg go out and it would snap at my groin, or would it go in and then I'd lose every ligament that way? And it's just, he just boom, drops him, and that's it. It was amazing.
The only thing more amazing than everything we just described is when we go to back to Bob as he's interviewing everybody. I still cannot get over, as someone who's relatively hairy myself, but the sweaty, hairy back and arms on Joe LeDuc. This is substandard definition, and it leaps through like it is like 1180p OLED, 3D, AI, VR. I can feel and smell the sweat coming off the back of Joe LeDuc here. He can focus on nothing else.
The Dutch Mantel looked at that and said, I got to get going on some stuff here.
Yes, exactly. He got on the treadmill.
Yeah, you mentioned over with Bob Caudle, it's Hump and the new champ, Paul Jones and Joe LeDuc. And Jones says that he wanted to bring the championship out of the closet.
He said this multiple times. I'm guessing that he was not commenting on the orientation, such as it was, of the championship belt, but this played a little weird.
He's beside himself with joy, and one thing is always true: his promos are always weird, and whether he's a manager or a wrestler, and that holds true here.
What else is weird? Joe LeDuc's forehead. You talk about, like, it looked at Abdul the Butcher's forehead and said, "I can do you one better." It's like there's 27 of Don Callis's scar all on the forehead of Joe LeDuc. It's just crazy.
Joe LeDuc is a scary looking dude.
Mm-hmm. And as he says, I'm not in this for looks. You know, you can go ahead and beat on me all you want. I'll just take it all and put it in my pocket and then go to the bank. And he was able to do that in his career, looking like that with the eyes. Again, to me, it was always the eyes too, of those things just kind of like bulging out there. And then you see him with the scars, or you see him with the blood pouring down his face, and it's like, I believe that. That man could kick my ass no matter where he is. He might be the nicest guy in the world. I don't believe it. He looks like that. There's no way he can be.
He's not a guy playing pro wrestler. This is a guy who's a mean, tough pro wrestler. He also ends this promo in just an incredible fashion, talking about Jimmy Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man, who is his next target. He says, I could boogie all day long and rock and roll day all long on your back. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, he can.
I believe it. Yes.
Totally.
People wonder why Jimmy Valiant was so over for so long. Like,
people are Jeremy Deemer, by the way. So
I am people.
This is the beginning of it. You know, when Jimmy Valiant was in Mid-Atlantic in 1981 as King James. He was doing that deal with Jerry Lawler over in Memphis. He came over. He had Lord Al Hayes was his manager.
Oh my God! Stop the presses.
Yes.
Is this available? Like, I don't care about MP4 or DVD. Is this available in IV form? Can this be dripped into my bloodstream?
Yeah, this is, and unfortunately, the network doesn't have that on there. You get a little bit of days with Nikolai Volkov and Chris Markov at the end of their run with the Mid-Atlantic tag titles, but you don't have any of that. And he went away. You know, it wasn't working. He went back to Memphis. He was doing stuff over there. And when he came back, he was the Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant, FM 100 on the tights because they paid him. And that's why FM 100 means music is on the back of his trunks at this time. And he comes into this bloody feud with Ivan Koloff. And that's how this whole thing begins over the Mid-Atlantic Television Championship. Ivan Koloff, managed by Sir Oliver Humperdinck with Jimmy Valiant. And then for 6.5 years, all the way into 1988, that's how it began. It went from Humperdinck to Gary Hart to Paul Jones's Army. But the one thing they always had in common was Jimmy Valiant. He was from Southwest Virginia. Everybody knew him. You know, they knew who he was. He was believable in that this is this crazy guy who we've seen out there punching with Ole Anderson. We believe that he's a tough guy. We believe that he's a little crazy. We see him in real life, near us doing crazy things. He was just the ultimate and one of the last of the territorial supermen, because it went into the national era and we got to see Pez Whatley and some of the Paul Jones stuff. But
Pez Whatley, Mike, I just have to mention, we need to have you back for a special bonus edition going back and following up on a free show that we did. I love Jeremy Brace because he knows right away that I'm going to refer to. The most confounding professional wrestling match Jeremy and I have ever watched, as Jimmy Valiant and Pez Whatley absolutely squashed the Road Warriors in 4 minutes in Georgia in 1983, I believe it was.
Yes, that is correct.
I will be on my deathbed, and that will be one of the things that plays through my mind, still trying to determine what I just watched.
That's like every time I see Jimmy Valiant in Japan. Like,
God.
Jerry Lawler's one thing. Then you see Valiant over there, and it's like, okay, this ain't going to work. But it was just, he connected with his people, and his people loved him. And as they get into 83, when Dory Funk Jr. had nothing left, I mean, they relied 100% on Jimmy Valiant for everything in that promotion and just rode that wave. And, you're literally catching the beginnings, because Joe LeDuc was really his biggest, his next big opponent after Ivan Koloff, goes into this deal with LeDuc. So you're catching the beginnings of what would become very tiresome for a lot of people who were fans in the mid to late 80s when it comes to Jim Crockett.
I can't wrap my head around Jimmy Valiant in Japan, but one guy we know from All Japan and the shows we've reviewed here is Abdullah the Butcher, and Sir Oliver Humperdinck is telling us that Abdullah the Butcher is coming into Mid-Atlantic. We get to see the Abbey clips, but we don't get to see clips of him terrorizing the audience in All Japan, which we love so much.
They didn't even have even though Wahoo McDaniel will refer to it later, they didn't even bring out the footage, although they would do it today, of him slaughtering Wahoo McDaniel in the corner at the behest of Roddy Piper to take the United States Championship away a year before, where they got so much outrage about it. They decided every time you see the clips of this today, it's flipped. They did the negative thing on it. It's not even black and white. They kind of just flip it into a negative picture that you're seeing on the screen, and that ended up going even further in the helping push that fear factor and the legacy of Abdullah the Butcher in Mid-Atlantic is this psychopath in there. It helped matters actually doing it in the way that they did it, as opposed to seeing Wahoo be all busted up and bloody. You still see him take the stake to the head, and you still see a little bit of blood, but it's, it actually gives a more ominous feel when they flip it into the negative.
And Valentine says that Abdullah the Butcher is going to soften up Wahoo McDaniel, and Valentine will put on the figure 4, and he will get carried out.
You know what I think we needed, Jeremy, to really put this promo over the top? I think we needed, in addition to Oliver Humperdinck and Greg Valentine talking, I think we needed the Grand Wizard to come and help Greg Valentine cut another promo just to help you.
It's, that's my Mount Rushmore of guys I don't want to hear cutting promos. I have no time for Greg Valentine, the human intermission for me. Can't stand it. And the promo is not the worst thing we're about to see, because his opponent, Greg Valentine's in the ring. He's taking on Mike Rotunda. And I'm like, Jesus, this has all the making of a hideously boring match.
A young, permed Mike Rotunda, who for some reason Bob Caudle is obsessed with saying how great of shape Mike Rotunda is in. And he's fine. He's a little flabby. He looks like non-steroid athletic, but the way Caudle's talking about him, it's like this is the inspiration, the fitness inspo for Lex Luger or something.
I always figure at this point in the game, by the time he ended up in Mid-Atlantic, that he was already married to Barry Windham's sister, and he was already in with Blackjack Mulligan, who was one of the biggest stars the Carolinas had ever seen up until that point. Dory Funk Jr. is doing the booking for Mid-Atlantic at this time. Obviously, you see a lot of Florida connections that are going on, including Mike Rotundo being brought up. And when you look at Rotundo, I mean, really, you see why people thought he was a blue chip guy. He's
For
tall.
sure.
He's a good looking guy. He can absolutely, obviously wrestle. He can be physical. You see him in there. He is a believable guy. But he was never a guy to emote very well. When you watch interviews with him, he looks like if those people that were around in the 80s, if you remember back in the day when planes were hijacked and they have the hostage video, or when somebody was kidnapped and they'd have this hostage video, every single promo, that is what Mike Rotundo is like.
Yeah.
We actually referenced that in a recent episode. I think it was like in Florida or somewhere where that's what it looked like. It's, to me, maybe some people won't like this because they're much bigger fans of the guy than I am. But when I see Mike Rotunda, I think Shelton Benjamin, a guy who is supposed to be great, but is so much less than the sum of his parts.
And sometimes some guys are better in tag team scenarios. Sometimes guys need, managers. This is why they're so important. It's why they were so important back then. I mean, you brought up the Wiz and Valentine. Listen to those Bob Orton promos when he'd go up there and challenge Bob Backlund or something like that. I mean, very few guys were Morocco-like when they were bringing them in and kind of spinning that wheel all the time. That's why the Albanos and the Wizards and the Blassies and, even in this case, guys like Humperdinck and stuff like that are really important.
Rotunda always seemed to me like he should have been a guy. Like you think about like everything you just said, he's legit. He can wrestle. He looks like a guy who should be a star, but he just can't talk, or he doesn't like just really give off a ton of charisma. He seemed like a guy who would have been prime for like a mid to late 80s to early 90s All Japan run as someone's tag partner, but that never even really materialized.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was because he didn't want to or anything like that, but he would have been perfect for something like that. I mean, you think like Crawford and Furnace, and I mean, even Rogers and Fulton, who were not the best, promo cutters in the world. They were always up against guys who could usually cut better promos and beat on them and give the heat to them. And, again, they were able to succeed over there and do very well because of the fact that you didn't need to talk. It wasn't that essential. As long as you could create a promo for the press where, again, it fit inside you and your character, which Rotundo could do essentially that way, playing it straight, talking about his wrestling background and his connection to the Destroyer and all that other stuff, it could have been a lot better for him.
Rotundo does show some fire during his comeback here, and while the match was not very exciting, I still like to compare this to some of the TV from this era that we were watching from like the different territories. The New York territory, for instance, this is still light years ahead of anything we would have seen on WWF television.
Well, because there's actual intensity. Like those shows, those WWF shows, and a few other territories from that time, but particularly that, it's slow, it's plotting, and no one seems particularly interested in what they're doing, whether it be the wrestlers themselves or the crowd. It's not great, but I wouldn't call it uninspired compared to what we saw from that territory.
Right, 1982, Mike, around the country at this time. This is so while it's serviceable for TV here, it's still a lot better than what a lot of territories were giving you.
Oh my God, absolutely. And I'll plug the Patreon now for the Mid-Atlantic Championship podcast, because the free show that is up in this moment for subscribers is episode number 58, which is March 5th, 1983. And there is no show up on Peacock. I don't have a copy of this show or worldwide, that somebody had saved off of VHS from back in the day. So what I decided to do was take a look around every single territory out there and kind of really, take a look at where we were at, because we are 1 month away at that point from the Briscoes and from Jim Barnett selling Georgia Championship Wrestling. There's going to be a huge seismic shift, which has already started to happen, because in 82 and in 83, the proliferation of syndicated UHF independent stations, and more so satellite and cable TV, started to change the game dramatically. And you saw Los Angeles die. You saw Shire in San Francisco die. You saw London in New Mexico, West Texas, Tri-State with McGurk. And people started to trade these tapes, and you watch the AWA, and the immediate thing is, oh my God, I love Bobby Heenan. You would trade to Memphis, and you go, oh my God, this show is crazy. There is not this. This is insane going on here. What is going on? Then you'd see Central States, and it's like the land time forgot. And then you see the Bruiser, and it's like the land time forgot. And these folks would see Madison Square Garden wrestling, and oh my God, we're gonna see all this great. No, you're not. Because All-Star Wrestling and Championship Wrestling are a bunch of squashes. And in some cases, depending on the week, you didn't even get good promos.
No.
Because, especially on the network, you don't see them because you don't have the localized promos. So it is amazing, but it shows when you have Boston, New York, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, that took them a long way. And with those folks really not knowing anything else, man, they had a completely, engulfed market with what they did and their style and their presentation, which was completely different than everybody else, almost everybody else, because they could hit towns twice a month. Whereas most of these promotions were going to these same, in many cases, really small towns once a week.
That's a great recap, and I definitely recommend all of our patrons to check that out over at the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Patreon as well. This match ended with Greg the Hammer Valentine dropping a couple elbows and getting the pin, and we get more House of Humperdinck. He's back again to be interviewed by Bob Caudle.
We've talked on actually some relatively recent shows where we've reviewed TV shows. About like a small roster, or oh my God, this is the 5th time we've heard from a guy. I don't know, outside of the opening interview segment of this show that had the Briscoes and Wahoo McDaniel, I don't think there's a segment with Bob Caudle on camera that does not involve Oliver Humperdinck on this entire show.
Exactly. He's back here. He's again just celebrating. It's one of the happiest days of his life.
He's very understated for what you would expect Oliver Humperdinck to be. It's almost charming the way he's talking about how he made a promise to Paul Jones that he's going to get him a championship, and nothing makes him feel better as a human being than fulfilling his promise to a great man and a great friend like number one Paul Jones.
And he feels good because Jimmy Valiant can't touch him because he's got Joe LeDuc there to take care of Jimmy Valiant. Valentine is coming for Wahoo. Abby's coming in. Slaughter's coming back soon. House of Hump is on top of the world right now. And we go back to the ring for our final standby match of the day. And it is Roddy Piper teaming with Wahoo McDaniel to take on the Gladiator and the Medic.
This is false. It's all those men, but what this is a showcase for the green and yellow checkerboard tights of Roddy Piper.
Fashion Corner.
God.
Yes, please.
I love this look.
For those people out there that love the tartan, maybe they don't like the checkerboard green and yellow, but I'm a fan of it myself. Maybe it's because
likewise
be a fan of Notre Dame, from an early age. I don't know what it is, but if you're a Packer fan, Roddy Piper's gear is going to be right up your alley.
It looks as if Pro Wrestling Noah was sponsoring a NASCAR race.
Piper runs wild on both guys. Piper is an absolute wild man here, and I'm loving every second of it. Here's a guy, you mentioned substandard definition. Here's a guy who's wrestling in high definition on a show that's not. This guy is a superstar.
He's left off my TV. He is wrestling somewhere between my feet on my ottoman and the TV stand that my television is standing on. It's incredible. Like, Piper is not a good pro wrestler, yet he's the best pro wrestler.
Yes.
When I was watching this and just seeing this absolute wild man, intense, living and breathing every second that he was on the screen, I don't know why I never thought of this before. All I want is Terry Funk against Roddy Piper in their primes when I see this. Like, did that ever happen? I have no recollection of that ever happening.
I don't think it did. I don't think it did, and Piper
crime.
would go down to Florida, in Georgia, and where Terry Funk would make appearances, but I don't think they ever crossed up, and it's too bad. We get to see Roddy Piper against Dick Slater, which is kind of a,
It's close enough. Yeah.
definitely a Terry Funk there, but Roddy Piper it's believable. And again, he's not a big guy or anything like that. And he's not technically proficient. And you don't want him to be. He's this whirling dervish. He's like the Tasmanian devil. And he's going to rake your eyes. And he's going to do this. And doesn't matter if he's wrestling as a babyface or if he's wrestling as a heel. And that's what's really important, too, in a part of a lost art where if you turn, you don't have to incorporate a bunch of nonsense. No. Wrestle the way that you did and make the subtle changes that you need to make. It's just because we don't have turns that are built to in the same way and things like that. But there was almost no time where a heel flipped to babyface where they weren't doing heelish things. It was just a matter of making the fans want to see them do that heelish thing or make them pop for it.
And even Bob Caudle references that during this match about how, yes, it's crazy to see Roddy Piper teaming with the likes of Wahoo McDaniel or any of these other guys, but he's still the same Roddy Piper.
They continue double teaming on the Gladiator. Wahoo with a chin lock, and you hear Piper on the apron yelling, "Ask him! Ask him!" Piper gets back in. He's slamming the back of the Gladiator's head against the mat repeatedly. He's destroying the Gladiator. Gladiator shots have no effect on Piper. We get a neck breaker, and he tags in Wahoo, who hits the big chop and gets the pin. The medic never got into the match.
We love that. It's one of our favorite things on this podcast when jobber teams are so pathetic that only one guy gets in, or when the non-jobber team is so confident. I know Jeremy loves this, that they will just throw Jobber A into the corner to get Jobber B to come in.
Yes, they're bored of beating up Jobber A, so they throw him in the corner. We want some of Jobber B now. This was, no, we're just going to beat down the Gladiator. The medic never gets into the match.
The closest the medic gets to getting into this match is, again, one of my favorite things in squash matches when the jobber, the enhancement talent that's on the apron, tries to make the save, gets near the scene of the action, and gets scared,
yes,
even though there's no actual physical barrier to making the save, and just stands there and decides that discretion is the better part of valor.
They just kind of, they'll run in, and it's like,
yeah,
it's nothing, just stop, because the guy on the other side of the ring is doing the same thing. It's like, I can't kick this man right here. I'm in fear. I'm stuck this way. It's like, there's wrestler paralysis that takes place when they hear entrance music. A ring's got sides you can get out of, but once the music hits, it's just, again, we've got to set up a fund to do something about this wrestler paralysis problem that we have for years now. It's been decades.
Yeah, there's an epidemic of wrestlers having their controllers unplugged. It's like the classic Alex Ovechkin back check video where he's just gliding, and someone actually created put the NHL 94 star around him, like the controllers getting unplugged. That's kind of what we got to solve. We need a vaccine for that.
And I was doing a quick search here because we go and you can look at Mid-Atlantic Pod. It's episode 33 that we do this show, and I was hoping to have some notes here on who the medic and the Gladiator or whatnot were there, and I don't have it here, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I do know is coming out of this match, we need a curated list of Roddy Piper matches. We're throwing that into the universe for our patrons to come back with as an intentionalized pick.
We've had far less Roddy than we should. We got the Roddy Greg the Hammer Valentine, Greg Valiant time. We got one of those.
We did get, yep.
We've had a lot of random Piper WWF. We did have Piper introducing his guys on Nitro, that all-time terrible segment.
I remember you did that.
So I guess some stuff between all of that would be.
Well, yeah, could somebody actually send you guys some good Piper, which is anything from the territories? I mean,
Yes.
That's what we're asking for.
strong in 82. Anything Piper 82, 83, he's a tour de force. I mean, you see it when he joins Gordon Soley. Was it October of 80? I can't remember. I'd have to find the date when the first day that he did commentary. And it was like this revolution or this revelation. And then you see him in pure territorial form with a Greg Valentine or a Ric Flair or a Jack Brisco or a Dusty Rhodes, or you go ahead and name it. I mean, it's you get it. You see it, you see it in LA when you see the old stuff of him there, but then to see him in this realm with these guys, with Flair or with an Ole Anderson or Jimmy Snuka or whatever it is, he's fantastic. He is so much better to me because when I started watching Roddy Piper, I mean, he was mostly WWF. He was, it was out of 80. So, and when did he do the retirement thing with Adonis? It was like 86.
87. Yeah.
87. So it's like, to actually watch Prime Piper, to me, I get it a lot more. It hits home a lot more how great he really was.
So good.
As opposed to the cartoon character he would become and a lot of the real life stuff that you find out later on down the road and things like that. It just, I like seeing this more pure form just as a wrestling fan.
Even though like the late 70s Portland stuff, some of the promos that I've watched on Twitter that I had never seen before were just so like it's Piper, but there's a believability in what he's saying that just, you're not going to get in, like you said, the cartoonish world of mid 80s WWF, which still incredibly effective in that world. Jeremy, we've talked about it with some of the MTV crossover shows, how like there's no way to know what wrestling looks like if he wasn't involved in that, other than
right guy at the right time for that. 1000%.
Whatever it would look like in 2023, it would not look like it does now if Roddy Piper in those MTV crossovers didn't exist.
Think about if Piper held a grudge. When he first went to Madison Square Garden, they stuffed his bagpipes, or, I don't know if it was on TV or at the Garden where they pulled the rib on him where they stuffed his bagpipes so he couldn't play. And it's like, he was out of that territory quickly. Granted, he was a smaller guy and all that stuff too. But say he held a grudge on the WWF and said, I wasn't going back there, and he stuck around with what would they have done? They always talk about, well, if Hogan wasn't the guy, he would have, would Vince have gone with Dusty? Yeah, he would have done something there. It still would not have worked out as well. But then when you factor in, if Piper's not there, how do you do that? How do you get that heat? How do you have somebody turn on somebody as obnoxious as Albano to turn him, into a good guy? Could Orndorff have done that? Bobby Heenan, it's really, when you take him out of the mix, it's really difficult to think what would have happened.
Well, he's the guy. They had Tom McGee waiting in the wings, so it would have been fun.
Yeah.
And Piper was able to extend that thing with Mr. T for years after this initially started. So like they got so much more mileage out of T because they can continue the feud with Piper into the next couple of years.
You don't think Bob Orton would have been able to pull that off on his own as effectively?
It's like, Jesse Ventura's got the blood issue. It wouldn't have been him. Paul Orndorff couldn't have done it on his own. Bob Orton, obviously, Morocco. Could Morocco have done it? Maybe.
That's probably the closest.
Maybe, yeah.
The guy that would have had the most. And I still don't think it would have been as good, but he probably could have gotten the closest to where Piper got out of any of the options available.
And those guys together, think about what they did in 82 in Georgia, which was the last big, again, because of Ole Anderson thinking, and probably deservedly so, that Jim Barnett had his hand in the cookie jar, and he goes and he gets fired while he's on vacation, or all this stuff breaks down while he's gone in the Christmas of 82. Like the lead into that, I mean, the footage is out there of Piper and Morocco on Entertainment Tonight goofing around with each other, Morocco going after Piper or going after Soley, which causes Piper to jump on him, and how big of a deal that was. I mean, it was by leaps and bounds the #1 show on satellite and cable TV. It was a huge deal. So again, there's a lot of what ifs there, that if, again, things don't fall, everything boy, did everything fall perfectly for Vince in every possible way.
God, I don't want to throw up on the air, Mike.
It kills me. It's everything broke just right.
Back in 82, let's wrap up this show as Jerry Brisco comes out with Bob Caudle. Jerry reminds us that Jack was in there against doctor's orders, and Wahoo is here. Caudle asks him about Abdullah the Butcher. Wahoo says, I know you're coming, and I'll be ready. He's going to have a dump truck to haul him out of here. And then Piper comes over to cut a promo. He's ranting like a lunatic. I have no idea what he said, but I love it. It was awesome.
I took notes. He had about 20 seconds here to end this show, and I knew he was going to make them count. So the digital pen was ready. He talks about buying Abdullah the Butcher 12 Krispy Kremes. He's talking about soaring with eagles and scratching with chickens. And the show goes off the air. I was ready to be so angry that we did not get a Roddy Piper promo. We got no more than 20 seconds. He made the most of it. I also don't think I've ever had the emotional whiplash of going from Jack Briscoe's manner of speaking to Roddy Piper's manner of speaking in like a 5-second span. That covers the gamut of what
Wahoo wasn't the bridge for you. Wahoo wasn't enough bridge for from Jerry to Piper.
I fell asleep when Wahoo was talking. I'm not much of a napper, but usually Wahoo promos do that to me, at least the ones I've seen. But my God, you go from the stoic, regular human being of Jack Brisco to the cocaine dust storm that is Roddy Piper. Good Lord.
Especially him dropping the regional reference at the time. Krispy Kreme was not a big thing back in the day. It was.
I didn't know it even was a thing. I got excited. Yeah. I was like, whoa.
So him breaking that out there, and he likes that line. He is one of the ones he'll pull out a lot on Mid-Atlantic is, you can either fly with the eagles or you scratch with the chickens. And it just was one of those like Piperisms. It's like, okay, sure. Yes, absolutely.
It was funny because I've heard the soar with the eagles, and there's like 3 or 4 different finishes to that sense, but I never heard scratch with the chickens. I'm like, oh, I like that. That works.
And the show went off the air. This was a fun show. I had a great time watching this show. This was such an easy, fun watch. We had a title match. We had a title change. We had Piper. We had a lot of stuff to run down here. Mike, we always end the show by picking out our favorite thing and the worst thing on this show. So I'm going to lead off with you, Mike. What was your favorite thing on this show this week?
My favorite thing, it had to be just the match and the finish of Brisco and Paul Jones. You know, it's an old classic thing. The Florida, it's Cowboys against Indians. You know, as Paul Jones would say in the feud with Brisco, that's why I have the Indian Deathlock. That's what it was made for, to kill Indians with. And
good Lord.
Yes, hey, 82, baby. And, that's what it was about. And you see, really, again, it's the end of Jack Brisco as a singles, his last real run with the belt. It will continue on for a little bit longer, but then that's pretty much it. And then you also see the end of Paul Jones' in-ring career, because it would not be long after this before he would end up losing that title, and then he would transition into a very garish tuxedo and become the manager of Dory Funk Jr. and start leading, his managerial career. So this is really, it's literally the end of an era. It is a match that you could have seen in 1973 in Ocala, Florida, and you're seeing it at the very end for them in Mid-Atlantic. So that, to me, that's got to be it, is going to be that the switch of the title and how the whole thing went down.
Adam, favorite thing for you?
Oh, man, I would say Bob Caudle on the show I thought was tremendous. We talked about that a lot earlier. Honorable mentions go to the very topical double clothesline that Wahoo McDaniel and Roddy Piper hit. I enjoyed that. And then, really,
it's too bad, though, they didn't say it in unison during Bob's the promo of just say double clothesline. That was my best. I love that during the Collision pre-show, the video package that they did.
Love it.
I love it.
Well, and it was
Yep.
disappointing too because I mean, there's so many physical similarities between Adam Cole and Wahoo McDaniel that you just, you figured that would be coming at some point.
You know what? Let me just, I'm sorry to cut you off again. Adam Cole could use, look, I am fine with Adam Cole turning into a heel. He is not a big guy. He's smaller now than he's ever been. Use that to your advantage. Incorporate, and want to say more, again, if he goes dirty, more Piper into that mix. Just be more annoying, be more Piper, which is not what you want to do in your everyday, regular walk of life. But in the wrestling ring, not bad.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Really, to me, the worst thing on the show is also the best thing on the show, depending on what you derive enjoyment out of in life, and that would be the Kelly Kiniski promo.
that is, yes, that is by far the correct answer. That was absolutely terrible.
It's a shame that he was not able to get and stuff over the way that LA Knight has been able to get over. It's shocking to me.
Starrcade 83. It's up on the network, I believe. I can't remember which date of the show in December it is, but when Roddy Piper is going through and selling the T-shirt that he has on for Starrcade and the official program that you can buy, and he's going through the pages, and you even get Big Blunder. Nah. Kelly Kiniski was still there in 1983. He would venture off for a little while, but yes, he would come back, and it didn't impress then either.
A best thing on this show, honorable mention to Joe LeDuc's backbreaker as well, because that was a tremendous finish.
And another honorable mention to Joe LeDuc's back hair sweat.
There it is, yes. And with that, we are going to wrap it up this week. I want to thank Patron Kendall for an excellent selection. I want to thank our guest, Mike Sempervive. Mike, we've plugged a lot of stuff today. Please remind everyone how they could follow you on Twitter and where else they should listen to your stuff.
On Twitter, on Instagram, on Threads, on those sorts of things, I'm at Sempervive. I've tried to quit Twitter for a long time, but I am not a big fan of social media. So you're not really going to catch me on the gram either. It's not like what am I showing off here at this point? I'm pushing 50. I got nothing for Instagram or Threads. So on X/Twitter is still probably the best place to get a hold of me there. But I would love it if you, one of the many projects that I do of course, as Jeremy said earlier, the wrestling news. And I really like that one a lot. Every single day, Monday through or Sunday through Saturday, we do not take a day off. Between 5 and 15 minutes every day, I will get you caught up on the world of professional wrestling. There's no rumor or conjecture or speculation or fantasy booking or any of that stuff. There's no paywall. There's no nonsense with it. It's just what you need to know to get your day started in wrestling, to get yourself caught up, or to get you to a show like Dave and Brian or Joe and Rich at VOW or John and Way at Post or Cornette and Last or I don't know, whoever the hell else is doing shows. Any of those folks who really want to talk about it more in detail, we just get you caught up and give you everything you need to know from around the world, whether it be hard news, whether it be results, big shows that take place, all that sort of stuff. WrestlingNews.com, Wrestling News AV on Twitter and on Facebook. Would love for you to give it a shot. You can obviously always catch me on Wrestling Observer Live with Brian Alvarez Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It is replayed at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That show is now, much like the Adam and Mike Big Audio Nightmare, behind a paywall. So if you don't already have a Twitch subscription, you're not going to be able to see or hear it unless you're joined up to F4W. So I would suggest use the TuneIn app. Check out Sports Byline, 3 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Eastern if you happen to miss it. Then also, of course, the Adam and Mike Big Audio Nightmare, which, we don't have to push that too hard here. You guys already know on where to get that. I also do, along with my friends over at the Black Wrestling site, Vin Forte and Cal, do Bulls in a China Shop, which is a part of their Patreon. You only have to pay the 1, pay the 10. Salute if you pay the 10, but $1 will get you in the door for all the additional content that those guys have over there. So we do a show going through old videos and just getting our reactions to things and things like that. It's a great time sitting around, just having a good time, friends talking nonsense. So you'll, again, if you like what we do here, if you like what Adam and I do, if you just want more me, It's another thing you can check out there. Did I name everything?
Yeah,
The
Mid-Atlantic Pod.
The Mid-Atlantic Championship podcast. Like I said, available. We go through. I've been going through all of the shows that are up on the network. I'm up through 1982 into 1983, getting close here. We're right up on it. The new show that's available on the Patreon is the March 12th, 1983 edition of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, hours before the final conflict between Don Kernoodle and Sergeant Slaughter in the steel cage against Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. It is the epitome of a tag team wrestling feud. It is everything. And what you see in Jim Crockett Promotions in the tag team division at that time, you still see in the blood of tag team wrestling today, whether it be FTR or plenty of other teams, even if they don't realize how inspired they were. And again, if you join up to the Patreon, I have a long form written piece in there talking all about tag team wrestling and Jim Crockett Promotions from the 1940s to the 1980s. If you like to read, this is a good place for you because I've put enhanced scripts in there. I've got special long form pieces that, again, this isn't going to be for everybody exactly, but if you're a fan of a good story, if you're a fan of old pro wrestling, if you're, again, to me, again, it's a fun place to go and check out. I'm trying to do some other things on it as well, too. I got a boxing thing coming up, looking at the heavyweight series in the 80s after that belt was broken up after Ali gave it up, and you have the Holmes era, and then leading into Mike Tyson. I got that on a back burner right now. I'll be doing some NWA Wild Side reviews that are going to be coming up, too, with Brian and Vinny looking at NWA TNA. I had to cover that. I paid money to cover that for the Pro Wrestling Torch. That's how I got into this whole wrestling media deal. Because they're doing that, I want to enjoy my time back in 2002. So I'm actually going to be reviewing some NWA Wild Sides where you see some guys like AJ Styles, Jason Cross, David Young, Sinister, Jim Miss. You see a lot of those same folks on TNA, except they're in a much more comfortable and better form working for Bill Barons and everything that was going on down there. Guy by the name of Jeff G. Bailey, a guy I'd always seen in the magazines as a manager. I've seen a little bit. I have no idea how this guy was not picked up by TNA. But long story short, that's all going to be available. Patreon.com/Mid-Atlantic Podcast. I talk about a lot of wrestling.
Love it. And Mike, this was super fun. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule, as we just heard there, to come and talk Mid-Atlantic with us. It was a ton of fun, and hopefully we can do it again sometime. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kendall. And I would say most importantly after this episode, thank you, Kelly Kiniski.
And with that, we're wrapping it up. Thanks again, everyone, for listening and supporting the show. We will talk to you again next time.